Hi, this is Lisa with Holland Designs Crochet. Today I am designing some slippers. I'm actually going to make some slipper boots. So the design is the cuff that I'm going to be making. So this is just a basic slipper bottom. And I've used this type of a design for several of my slipper boot patterns. So I've already worked my rounds here, starting at the toe. I worked it to the length that I needed for the size I'm making. And then I worked the rows of the heel. So the rows of the heel just worked back and forth. And then there is a seam at the back of the heel there, a very simple seam. And if you look at the inside of it, it's just slip stitch. So what I've done is I've worked slip stitch seam, and then I've worked back along that seam with slip stitch again, so that my yarn is placed at the top of the cuff. If I wanted to start working the cuff, I know it's in the right position there to begin. I actually did fasten off on this sample, but if you were actually making the cuff, you wouldn't need to fasten off. So just basically moved your yarn and your hook back to the top of that seam. So I'm just going to show you how this is done on the other one. I'm actually working with 2 skeins of yarn held together. So these are DK weight wool here, and I'm just working 2 held together to create more of a bulky weight, or I think it more of a Ran worsted weight yarn for this particular yarn that I'm using. And so I've basically worked the entire slipper, and now I'm just going to work the heel seam. And so when you read a pattern, it'll say to fold the last row in half downward, and that means away from the top of the slipper. And so downward is the opposite direction, right? Away from the top of the slipper. And so that's how you know how to fold it when you are going to begin your seam. And then you just simply working in slip stitch, just working through both thicknesses and working straight across and sewing that heel seam. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So I just wanted to demonstrate for you how you fold the slipper when you are told to fold it in half downward. And so then once you've completed the seam, you are then told in the pattern to turn the heel right side out. So once I've completed my seam, and again, I can also work back in slip stitch along the seam itself, just placing 1 slip stitch per each of the slip stitches that you already worked for the seam, and just reposition your hook back at the top of the ankle or the back of the heel. So I'll just quickly do that. And then once you've gotten to the top, you can again either fasten off, or you can leave your yarn connected if you'd like to begin working the cuff right away. And then so once the seam is completed, just turn it right side out so that that seam is actually hidden on the inside of the slipper. And it shouldn't be very uncomfortable or anything. I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a seam, but I've worn crocheted slippers with heels like this, and I didn't find it in any way uncomfortable. It stretches out nicely when you're wearing them, so it's quite a nice, convenient, simple seam. And hopefully this little video explanation makes it clear for you when you're reading a pattern exactly how that is done. And you do find this in several of my slipper patterns, probably other slipper patterns you might encounter. And also sometimes little amigurumi feet on like a teddy bear or something. You might have a similar type of thing where you're creating a very small version of this, but you're creating a little foot, and then you'll sew a heel seam, and then you'll work in rounds to create a leg on like a teddy bear or something. So I hope that you find this video helpful and has given you some confidence if you'd like to try some slipper patterns.